Hello everyone and welcome back. This is part 2 where I will endeavor to guess some of the story based on key details and realms lore that Larian might have used for Baldur's Gate 3. So get some snacks and relax because we're going on a long journey for this one. Needless to say, research over this past week has been a journey on its own, sifting through roughly 30 years of realms lore in search of any speck of an answer can take anyone down a rabbit hole of possibilities. Of course, square one on our journey starts with our 3 murals. I've tried to clean them up just a little bit so that we can have a better look while I go over everything. I have discovered the possible identities of some of the people on the second mural, as well as the identity of the symbol adorning the armor strewn about beneath them, which thereby connects some dots to the first and third murals. We are most likely looking at members of the Emerald Enclave, moreover, some of their leaders. A number of years ago, we were introduced to the Adventurers League and the newly solidified factions. The Harpers and the Zentarum most of us already know about. In addition to that, we now have the Lord's Alliance, the Order of the Gauntlet, and the Emerald Enclave, especially since we have confirmation of the Emerald Enclave's involvement via the screenshot that I mentioned in the last video. What we can infer so far is that the Emerald Enclave might take on a major role since none of the other factions seemingly have any representation at the moment. I'm willing to bet that in this lineup, we are looking at Dylan Winterhound, the Enclave's sole representative during the Rise of Tiamat campaign, and longtime friend of the ancient tree ant Turlang of the High Forest. Next, we might possibly have Shadowmoon Crystal Embers, second in command of the Enclave as the Hierophant of the Elder Circle, their spiritual leader. She was inflicted with madness as a result of the events during the Spell Plague with Shar, and was only recently cured during the events of the Sundering in 1486 DR by the Chosen of Lathander, Stead Whitehorn. She has since started to reorganize the Enclave, so it could make sense for her to be here, taking an active part in the events to come. The others, I'm going to have to go further out on a limb in my speculations. Here, it's possible we could have Shanthala Deepcrest, the leader and Grand Cabal of the Enclave. On one hand, she could be letting Shadowmoon take the lead on what's happening. On the other hand, this could be a random member assisting while Shanthala herself is busy with other things. The last possible name involved with the murals is Ashenford Torenbow, the elder and third in command of the Enclave. As the one who holds the role of rational and conservative thought, it would make sense for him to be at the forefront of the coming events as well. But due to lacking descriptions, it's possible these all could be more members of the Enclave assisting with what's happening. Other than Delan, they all appear to be druids. Now, with the other factions in mind, I think it's a safe guess that we are seeing the Enclave meeting with the Order of the Gauntlet and the Lord's Alliance, possibly beseeching their aid. Between the second and third murals, I don't think that the Zentarum are involved. If we want to go on color observations, yes, it is possible our tiefling over here is a Zent, but based on how the Alliance operates with sponsoring adventurers and the Order accepting anyone with a righteous heart, he could very well belong to either of the organizations. Or he could very well be a Harper. They are more colorful in their membership than the other factions. It would make sense for at least one of these people being a Harper, as they would have a common enemy. And based on the Zentarum's goal of global conquest and history of animosity with the other factions, I'm willing to bet they might have a hand in causing the events to come. And what about the tree in the background? Is it possible this is Turlang or some other great tree of importance? Now, here's where things get exciting. The armor we see strewn about beneath the group all bear the unholy symbol of Shar. We've already seen signs of her sister Selune multiple times, but now we get a third iteration of Shar. First, we had Shadowheart herself worshipping Shar, then Shadowheart in a temple of Shar, and now this mural. This mural that also tells us that we are on the center stage of a Plot by the Dead 3. The question now is How does the Emerald Enclave, and subsequently the other factions, Selûne, Shar, and the Dead Three, how do they all fit together? Let's start at the beginning for a moment, with a little thing called the Dark Moon Heresy. Now, without going into too much detail, the Dark Moon Heresy is the belief that in the beginning, after Lord Ao had created the galaxy and the crystal spheres, there was the two-faced goddess, and in a way, she was the beginning of everything. Until one day, the two disagreed with each other and split into two entirely separate entities. We know these two today as Selûne and Shar. Throughout creation and the entire history of our crystal sphere, these two beings fought each other. They are subsequently the reason we have a pantheon of other deities in the first place, as well as the planet itself. The two have quite an extensive history you could look into, and I think it's pretty neat what they have. Alright, now we have a basis for these two goddesses being involved in Baldur's Gate 3. But where do the Dead Three come in? Bane, Baal, and Merkel. These three deities and ex-adventurers are historically some of the worst troublemakers to ever grace the realms, each with their own individual histories and claim to fame outside of their initial ascension to godhood. Now, Baal, most of you obviously already know about. Some of you may even know that he is actually a servant to Bane. And if you're like me, he's probably the reason you were introduced to the Forgotten Realms in the first place. For those of you who never got a chance to touch the Murder in Baldur's Gate campaign, let me catch you up to speed. Abdel Adrian is now canon. But fear not, the books are not canon. Although the campaign does have its own extensive plot with many relevant characters in the realm today, all you need to know is that Baal is back for good this time, and all Baal spawn are now 100% dead. Baal himself now exists in a severely weakened state. The last we are told about him is that he can pretty much only subtly influence people who harbor murderous intentions. And as a side note, since we canonically chose to stay immortal at the end of the Throne of Baal game, it would be logical to assume that the essence that Solar sealed away on Mount Celestia is still there. For now. Next to catch up on is Merkel. He too was killed and resurrected, but didn't quite do it as loudly as Baal did. He came back due to his tampering with the artifact known as the Crown of Horns. It was through this artifact that he revived himself. During the time between his death and revival, he used the crown to keep his influence alive across Faerun. Beings devoted to Merkel who came in contact with the crown are turned into horned harbingers and gain a significant amount of clerical and necromantic powers, even if they possessed no such powers prior to touching the crown. The game's new logo started looking awfully suspicious again when I learned about the crown. Merkel was the Lord of the Dead. That portfolio is currently being held by Kelemvor. Although the Sword Coast Adventure Guide tells us that Merkel went to serve Kelemvor after his revival, Ed Greenwood himself states that Merkel obeys no one but is influenced by Baal and Bane. Whatever the relationship between those two currently is, we can set that aside for the time being. What matters here is that the Dead Three still call each other allies. And lastly, Bane. He is the deity of fear, hatred, and tyranny. Some things to keep in mind is that he is the strongest of the three, is the leader of the three, loves to plot and scheme, and his overall goal is to control Faerun. Things are starting to line up a little with the Zhentarim now, right? The Zhentarim, of course, worship him. He also died and was revived through the death of his one son, but is the only one of the three to regain nearly all of his power. Bane is where some things start to link up. Many on Bane's list of enemies are Selûne's allies. Shar is an ally to Bane and Merkel, and Bane and Shar have worked together in the past. Two additional things that are really important with Bane is that his clergy are charged with manipulating their way into power in every nation, city-state, or freehold in all of Faerun to bring them under his influence, and He has also conquered the Goblinoid pantheon, with specific emphasis on the chief deity of the Goblinoids, McAllik, and the chief deity of the Bugbears, Hrukek. Now, those two actually line up with the info we found with the murals, and we can even draw a parallel to the Goblin Camp events we got to see in the last demo. One thing I almost forgot to point out is that Bane's clergy are actually encouraged to perform acts of political infiltration along with inciting mayhem and acts of torture. A while back, Sven did mention that we would be able to take part in the political struggles within the city of Baldur's Gate. It is possible these two things are connected. With all of that in mind, let's go back to the Harpers for a moment. They have been around a very long time, almost as long as the Dead Three have had worshippers. But despite the Harpers' multiple breakups and reformations, they have been opposing the Dead Three all this time. Starting back during their first reformation, during a night called the Gathering of the Gods, Selûne herself, among multiple other good deities, supported the Harpers and spoke through their clergy in opposition to the Dead Three's actions back then. We have more dots lining up a little bit, right? Remember Turlang over in the High Forest? The Harpers also have an ally in the High Forest called the Druids of the Tall Trees, and both of these groups heavily oppose the Goblinoid races. That gives us a link to opposing the Goblinoids in the Cult of the Absolute and subsequently opposing Bane. Now keep in mind, all four of these people on the mural could very well be Harpers, and Delan over here is still the lone Enclave representative. It is also possible for the Harpers to take center stage on the events to come. They do share a lot of similarities with the Enclave, and logically have more links to opposing Bane and everything that he would subsequently bring with him. But what about the Illithids? Where do they come in with this new revelation? Although they also share a goal of world domination and further beyond that, galactic domination, they still see any non-Illithid race as inferior. This one was a little harder for me to connect, but here's what I think. What if Bane instructed Merkel to use the Crown of Horns to control the Illithids? With a portion of Merkel's personality still inside of the crown, he pretty much controls the Horn Harbingers that are created from the crown as his own tools, even making the target turn from their currently worshipped deity to worshipping Merkel. All he would have to do is use this crown to turn an Elder Brain or some other Illithid leader equivalent into a Horned Harbinger that he could control. And through that, he could subsequently control an entire hive of Illithids. Canonically, when Merkel was dead, he teleported the crown around Faerun to different people, keeping his influence alive. So, what's to stop him now from teleporting it into the middle of a bunch of Illithids? On a small side note, Shar was allied with the Drow deity Verum, and worked with him to develop shadow magic with Shadowweave. Although Verum was revived after his death, a portion of his followers did convert to Shar. So in a way, we have a link to the Drow in the Underdark now as possible supporters. But it's possible that could just be nothing. With all of that in mind, where does that leave us? A land of many races and multiple divine beings. We've got that. Armies of evil. We've got that. A cult whose shadowy network is chipping away at the foundations of the realm. We've got that. And being in the middle of a plot hatched by the Dead Three, I think we've got that. I wholeheartedly think we have the makings of a union between Bane and Shar. The question is, how does it begin? When it comes to the details, only time will tell at this point. But in the meantime, here is my speculative summary of all the info we currently have for a possible plot. Starting with a partnership between Bane and Shar, their assumed union will be the beginning of everything. But what do they each bring with them? Bane, seeking global conquest, brings with him Baal, Merkel, the Goblinoids, the Zentarum. Baal is severely weakened, but can corrupt people. Merkel has the Crown of Horns and could logically start enthralling people to the cause. namely lithids to start off, the Goblinoid Pantheon got conquered by Bane. Subsequently, he now has their support, and the Zentarim have worshipped Bane for ages and share the same goal of conquest. All the while, they have the means, and historically have been, infiltrating other groups across Faerun. And now for Shar. She's already been an ally to Bane and Merkel in the past, but what else does she bring? In her line of multiple titles and domains, she actually presides over the Underdark. As the oldest opposition to the forces of light, she has the power to see everything that happens in the darkness across Faerun. Most deities don't have that level of perception. Her clergy are also secretive and use subversive tactics and, once upon a time, utilize the powers of the Shadow Weave. With this in mind, there is the possibility Shar has finally recreated the Shadow Weave after the events of the Spell Plague. Between her presiding over the Underdark and her old partnership with Veyron, she could also bring them out of the Drow. Shar also created and rules over the Shadowfell, with portals leading to it becoming a frequent thing the deeper you go into the Underdark. She is also fervently worshipped by the Shadowvar. Today we know them as Shades, or the Shade Lords. They can be seen as potential allies as well. Shar has quite a number of looser possibilities when it comes to what she could bring to the table. But what about the common enemies between all of these evil deities? Who could we see opposing them? To start this side off, we have, of course, Selûne, sister of Shar and goddess of the moon. Now, not all of her allies readily fit into a role for a struggle against the forces of darkness, so I'll be looking at those whom could potentially chime in on the events of Baldur's Gate 3. From there, we can guess that Maestra will be in opposition. While the original Mistral was born from both goddesses, historically all of Maestra's incarnations have been allies to Selûne and opposed to Shar, especially since Shar has sought to usurp Maestra's power and role. Another likely ally can be Lathander, the Morning Lord. He is one of the current greater deities, and Selûne does try working with him to shed light on Shar's dark deeds. He especially has a connection to opposing Shar, since her clergy are responsible for him causing the event known as the Dawn Cataclysm. Next we have Sehine Moonbow, the elven goddess of the moon and the strongest female member of the Seldarin. She has worked closely with Selûne for a long time, and even played a part as her Fae aspect for a time. Although she is back to being an independent goddess right now, what matters here is that she absolutely hates the undead and is completely intolerant of necromancy. Her followers have made it their duty to destroy the undead and only barely tolerates the Baelnorn liches when necessary. Although she traditionally keeps herself apart from the happenings on Toril, something tells me she won't sit idly by anymore. Another who works closely with Selûne is Tymora, the goddess of luck, whom also happens to be hostile towards Bane. And of course, we have Chauntea herself, a greater deity nearly as old as the two sisters, and also holds opposition to Bane and the other evil deities. And lastly, of the potential divine allies, we have Corellon, the patron god of all elves. He opposes Bane and the Goblinoid Pantheon, as well as his exiled son, Veyron. He is angered by those who defile the dead. So logically, we can expect him to oppose Merkel and the necromantic arts. Beyond that, he does have his own relationships and ties to the other nature and good aligned deities. From the way I see it, everything on both sides seems to be interconnected in multiple ways. But of course, last but not least, our non-divine allies in this fight could very well be the Emerald Enclave, the Order of the Gauntlet, the Lord's Alliance, and the Harpers, each with their own respective ties to the good aligned deities mentioned. Thank you so very much to everyone who made it to the end of this journey with me. At the end of it all, it looks like things are shaping into a grand war between the gods, and we, without a doubt, still have many pieces missing, and only time will tell at this point. But I am hopeful that we are onto something here. Whatever August may hold in store for us, I absolutely can't wait to see what Larian brings. And whether I'm right or wrong, I will do everything I can to bring new evidence to light in our adventures. Let me know what you thought about everything in the comments below. Do you think I am absolutely crazy and I looked way too deep into this? Or do you think we're actually onto something here? In the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at McAllik_. I hope you all enjoyed this video and had plenty of snacks to keep you company during it. Until next time, stay safe out there.